Hi, it's Katrina. For thousands of years, humans have been using metal that fell from the sky. When archaeologists opened King Tut's tomb in 1922, they found golden chariots, elaborate thrones, and tons of jewelry. But tucked among all the treasures was something that didn't match everything else. A small, sleek dagger with a blade made of metal that didn't come from Earth. The discovery of an iron dagger in King Tut's tomb made before the Iron Age baffled scientists for a century. The truth behind the blade reveals a forgotten history. This is the story of how humans mastered space metal long before the Iron Age even began. King Tut's meteorite dagger. What if I told you that the boy king had a dagger from another world? When British archaeologist Howard Carter cracked open the sealed tomb of King Tutankhamun in 1922, he wasn't just opening a door to the afterlife, he was opening a garage full of ancient loot. It was like breaking into a hoarder's house who'd been sealed under their own newspapers for 3,000 years. Except this stuff was valuable. There were golden chariots, elaborate thrones, embroidered robes, ceremonial staffs, and enough jewelry to make the queen blush. But tucked among all the royal bling was something that didn't match everything else. Something small, sleek, and cosmic. It was a dagger made of space metal. Or if you prefer a more scientific way of explaining it, meteorite forged iron blade. It was found resting quietly in the wrappings of a teenage pharaoh who died over 3,300 years ago. And for nearly a century, the cosmic weapon haunted archaeologists. Not because it's cursed, but because it shouldn't have been in the tomb in the first place. How did King Tut have an iron dagger before the Iron Age even started? An iron dagger before the Iron Age? Tutankhamun died around 1323 BC, but the Iron Age, the era in which humans figured out how to melt iron ore and forge tools from it, didn't even start until roughly 1200 BC. That is a 150-year gap between when the dagger was buried and when iron working was even a thing. So the big question is, how did an Egyptian teenager get a knife made from a material that hadn't been invented yet? This is where meteors come in. Before smelting, the only way people got iron was when it fell from the sky. Iron meteorites are giant hunks of space metal, rich in nickel and cobalt. And somehow, humans knew this. Well, a few did. Before anyone knew how to smelt iron, they had figured out how to turn space metal into cutlery. It's a little baffling. Which is why scientists have been so crazy for this iron blade. CSI Cairo steps in. In 2020, a team led by Takafumi Matsui of the Chiba Institute of Technology in Japan decided to take a closer look at King Tut's blade. Not metaphorically. They actually flew to Cairo, brought their portable scanning X-ray fluorescence instrument, and pointed it at the dagger like interstellar detectives. What they found was a chemical fingerprint straight from outer space. It was iron laced with nickel and cobalt, plus hints of chlorine and manganese. They also determined that the strange, mysterious, bumpy, black spots on the blade came from troilite, a sulfur-containing mineral that tends to hitchhike on iron meteorites. Even more interesting is that the dagger's surface still bore traces of the Widmanstätten pattern, which I'm sure almost nobody has ever heard of before. The pattern is a cross-hatched structure that only forms when meteoritic iron cools very slowly in space. The pattern vanishes when you overheat it. What this means is that the blade was never cooked beyond 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. And what that means is that whoever made this ancient artifact didn't melt the meteorite down like later blacksmiths would. The method to create the blade from the meteorite was totally unique and must have been developed specifically for meteoric iron. Which means, before the Iron Age, there was the Space Iron Age. I think we need to rewrite all the history books now with this information. That would have gotten my attention in school. What do you guys think? The blacksmith. Regardless of the technique, whoever crafted King Tut's dagger was a master blacksmith. To find out who this mystery person was, the scientific team turned from the blade to the hilt. The hilt of this amazing relic is an ornate handle of gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and malachite. These were all typical pharaonic materials, used frequently in all kinds of royal treasures. But the adhesive used to stick all of the jewels to the golden handle raised eyebrows. It was highly unusual. In ancient Egypt, craftsmen typically used organic glue. It was a substance like sticky tree sap or some kind of natural goo from an animal. But the hilt of Tut's space dagger was bonded with lime plaster, which is a mixture of sand, water, and calcium oxide. That material didn't catch on in Egypt until much later, during the Ptolemaic period over 1,000 years after Tut's death. So, who made him this dagger? Scientists are now suspecting that it wasn't even the Egyptians, because the only people known to be using lime plaster 3,300 years ago during King Tut's reign were the people up north, the Mitanni and the Hittites. You may remember them from such books as the Bible. Diplomacy, ancient style. So, my friends, what have we got here? A meteoritic iron blade forged at low heat, a hilt decorated with foreign materials and bonded with non-Egyptian plaster, and a manufacturing technique out of sync with Egypt's own technological timeline. And all of this brings me to the Amarna letters, a trove of 3,400-year-old clay tablets. These tablets act sort of like the inbox of ancient Egyptian diplomats. Each tablet is from or to someone of royal importance, and the subject matter varies wildly. One of these letters from the king of Mitanni lists wedding gifts sent to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who happened to be King Tut's grandfather. The gifts were sent to Amenhotep upon marrying a Mitanni princess. You can probably see where this is going. Among the wedding gifts was a gold-sheathed iron dagger inlaid with genuine lapis lazuli, and this was definitely the dagger found in Tut's tomb. Amazingly, it wasn't even for him. It was a gift to his granddad from a foreign nation who apparently had better blacksmiths than Egypt. Matsui and his colleagues think the blade passed down the royal line like a cosmic heirloom, eventually winding up in the hands of the boy king, who was buried with it at age 19. A priceless wedding present, smiles from the stars, lying for millennia in the Valley of the Kings. Now, where can I get a space dagger? And can I please be buried with it? Villena's Bronze Age Bling. Some treasures are buried in chests, others are buried in myths. But in 1963, on the sun-baked soil of Villena, Spain, archaeologists stumbled onto something that looked like it had been dropped by a pharaoh on vacation. 66 gleaming artifacts, including bowls, bottles, beads, and bracelets, all shimmering with prehistoric opulence. Gold and silver galore, the kind of haul that makes museum curators cry tears of joy. But amid the dazzling stash of Bronze Age glitz, there was something strange, something dark. No one knew it at the time, but two of the objects in the newly discovered treasure hoard were extraterrestrial, as in they were forged from iron that fell from space. Cosmic Care Package. Let's rewind the clock roughly 3,000 years, just 3 centuries after King Tut kicked the bucket in what may have been a drunk driving accident involving a chariot. The Bronze Age was winding down, and on the Iberian Peninsula, highly skilled artisans were shaping metals into ceremonial finery. Mostly they made things out of copper, gold, and silver, but sometimes they made things out of something else. The hoard of goodies found in Villena, now known as the Treasure of Villena, contained a bracelet and a decorative hollow sphere. These two things don't sound that amazing, but they were unlike everything else in the hoard. What makes the two objects so exciting is that they both contain what archaeologist Jose Maria Soler Garcia described in the 1960s as a dark leaden metal. It was shiny in places, flaky in others, and coated with a cracked, rusty-looking oxide. At the time, no one could figure out what it was, so they put it in the "we'll get back to this box later" box. But they never did get back to it, and they never did identify the mysterious dark metal. 6 decades later, a new team of scientists armed with mass spectrometry equipment showed up to crack the case. Mass spectrometry is a fancy scientific method that weighs molecules with the same precision you'd expect from a neurotic jeweler. All the weighing of molecules allows scientists to determine exactly what a particular thing is made of. And what they found in these objects was nickel. Lots and lots of nickel. Nickel is a chemical signature not found in earth-forged iron, but very common in meteorites. Additional study revealed that this particular nickel came from an iron meteorite that slammed into Earth around 1 million years ago. Space rock hit the planet, sat patiently for an entire million years, and then some guys came along and turned it into Bronze Age jewelry. But where in the world were ancient artisans finding all of these meteorites? It's not like they could order them on getyourmeteorite.com. The cult of the meteorite. Ever been walking down the street and found a meteorite lying in the grass? No, me neither. And that's because meteoritic iron isn't exactly lying around in neat piles waiting for people to grab it. And it wasn't in ancient times either. So how did people find meteorites? They had to hunt them down, and it was extremely difficult to do. In Bronze Age Spain, iron was about as common as a saber-toothed tiger sighting. And saber-toothed tigers were extinct, so let's just say that meteorites were rare. Really, really rare. Ignacio Montero Ruiz of the Spanish National Research Council explained that iron at the time was so exotic, it held the same status at least as gold or silver. People weren't using the small amounts of space iron they could find to make weapons. No. This was specifically used for high-value items, typically reserved for royalty or people of high status. It's why King Tut had a meteorite dagger, and it's why these two objects were buried with a massive hoard of other treasures. But who owned the bracelet and the orb? There are no royal names, no inscriptions, no selfies engraved on gold plates. Archaeologists think both objects likely belong to an elite community, not necessarily a single high roller. The meteorite artifacts could have come from a ceremonial hoard rather than a personal stash, though it's not like I can ask the original owner. The running theory among experts right now is that a group of meteorite-obsessed people used the objects as a communal offering to the gods. They may have belonged to some space metal cult. Trust me, there were weirder groups in ancient Europe, and more than a couple cannibals roaming around. If you think about it, it all makes sense. If you had a chunk of space metal, something that literally fell from the heavens, you'd probably treat it with reverence too if you were around 3,000 years ago. I mean, even now, really. It's not like you had Google to give you all the answers. You would have some sort of high priest telling you that what you found was a gift from the gods who lived in the heavens. Either way, meteorite iron was considered valuable enough to join the greatest treasure hoard ever discovered on the Iberian Peninsula. To this very day, the stash is still hailed as the most important prehistoric treasure in Europe. At least that's what the Vienna Archaeological Museum says. There might be some competition out there. If you had a chunk of meteorite iron and a blacksmith at your disposal, what would you have forged? Let me know in the comments. I have a big story coming up straight out of James Bond with Nazis and stolen relics and everything, but I wanted to give a quick thank you to Luis Alfonso Alba for the super thanks. It really means a lot, and we wouldn't be here without you. If you are new here, hit that join button to join the Origins Explained family. When the Nazis stole a space Buddha. It sounds like the plot of a rejected Indiana Jones sequel. Nazis in Tibet, ancient gods, a secret statue forged from the stars. But this isn't some pulpy script that ended up in the trash. It's a real archaeological drama. A 23-pound Buddhist statue carved from a 10,000-year-old meteorite was smuggled out of Asia by the Nazis. You can't make this stuff up. A cosmic relic with a complicated past. Let's start our crazy adventure with the basics. Sometime between the 8th and 10th centuries, give or take a century and a few wars, an artisan in Asia chiseled a seated Buddhist deity out of space rock. Not granite, not bronze, meteorite. Specifically, a super rare type of meteorite called ataxite. It's a mostly iron blend with an unusually high dose of nickel. The source of this meteorite was the Chinga meteorite field, which straddles the Siberia-Mongolia border. It's basically a cosmic junkyard full of ancient fragments from a meteor that slammed into Earth 10,000 years ago. You know how hard it is to find and pick up all the pieces of a smashed plate in the kitchen? Now imagine the plate is a meteorite and the kitchen is Siberia. Not so simple, is it? So far, over 250 chunks of the original meteorite have been found in the field. Some weigh more than 20 pounds, but only one was ever turned into a deity. The Buddhist statue stands 9.5 inches tall and weighs over 23 pounds. That's a heavy statue for being less than a foot tall. It depicts a man, possibly the Buddhist god Vaisravana, sitting cross-legged and holding an unidentified object. Experts think the object is either a lemon or a money bag. That's because Vajravana is the Buddhist god of wealth and war, and lemons are symbols of wealth. I don't know why exactly, but they do have a sort of rich vibe to them. On the statue's chest is a Buddhist swastika carved deeply into the cosmic iron. Before you gasp, keep in mind that the original Buddhist swastika was a symbol of good fortune. It was never a thing of evil until the Nazis stole it from the Buddhists and made it into a sign of hatred. Speaking of Nazis, this is where things start to get messy. The weirdest field trip in history. 10,000 years ago was when the meteorite hit the Earth, and then about 1,200 years ago was when a Buddhist artisan carved it into the shape of a god. The next big event was in 1938. That was when the Nazis sent their guys to Tibet. The Nazis were not the kinds of lunatics to pass up a pseudo-scientific expedition. They were the kinds of deranged maniacs who sent zoologist and ethnologist Ernst Schaefer to Tibet on a mission to investigate the Aryan origins of humanity. Spoiler alert, there are no Aryan origins. Schaefer's team was sent on a completely insane mission to prove that the German people were the descendants of a race of highly advanced people who ruled the earth in ancient times. And these people were, according to Nazi ideology, known as the Aryans. For some reason only Nazi pseudoscientists could ever understand, the key to this Aryan mystery was somewhere in Tibet. Schaefer's team was there to collect skulls, folklore, and whatever else they could slap into their racial mythology. While rummaging around the Himalayas, someone got their hands on the meteorite Buddha. How? We don't know. The exact details about the statue's discovery are non-existent. All the historical records say is that the statue was spirited back to Germany and quickly vanished into a private collection. So I guess the Nazis didn't care that much about their ideology. The artifact simply went to some rich person, where it lived a quiet life of obscurity in their collection until 2007. And that was when a group of researchers convinced the owner to let them borrow a few shavings from its divine armpit. However, there was too much contamination from the weather and probably from too many greasy Nazi fingers. In 2009, the team asked for permission to access the statue's interior. They wanted samples from within that hadn't been dirtied at all by the outside world. Next, scientists from the University of Stuttgart, led by Elmar Buchner, cracked the case wide open. Tests revealed the Buddhist statue to be made from space metal. The chemical signature was a match for the Chinga meteorite field. It was quite the revelation for scientists, and one of few archaeological discoveries that made international headlines. Here's the deal. No other human statue carved from a meteorite has ever been found. This piece of work is entirely 100% unique, and that means it's got to be worth a fortune. But just how much of a fortune? One-of-a-kind treasure. Before I put a price on something that's clearly priceless, I have some facts to share with you. Humans have been using meteoritic iron for thousands of years. You've got daggers in Egypt, bracelets in Spain, and even an arrowhead in Switzerland. But all of those were simple objects, things like tools, weapons, and jewelry. This statue is the only known human figure carved from a meteorite in all of recorded history. That's not just rare, that makes it the Mona Lisa of meteorites, the Venus de space rock. The only known artifact where ancient metallurgy meets Buddha meets interstellar debris. And then you've got a Nazi subplot thrown in just to keep the absurdity cranked up to 11. And then there's the issue of trying to slap a price tag on this thing. Experts say that based strictly on the material alone, putting aside the fact it's an artifact, the Buddha is worth about $20,000. The real value of the Buddha is astronomical, no pun intended. 1,000 years old, one of a kind, and from space with a Nazi backstory, it would sell for a monumental amount of money. But luckily, it's not for sale. You'd have better luck auctioning off the moon. This legendary Buddha remains in the same private collection it's been in since 1938. The owners have changed, but the space Buddha remains. It also remains a mystery since through all these studies and investigations, few important questions have been answered. There is still no information about who carved it, why it was made from a meteorite, how it was shaped, or what the Nazis really wanted with it. Why go all the way to Tibet just to bring back one artifact and give it to some rich guy with a private art collection? It makes no sense. Not even by Nazi logic. Ancient Egyptian space beads. And now we've come full circle, back to Egypt, where even more artifacts have been discovered crafted from space metal. Before there were pharaohs and golden masks, before pyramids dotted the horizon, and before iron tools were a glimmer in some nameless Bronze Age inventor's eye, there were beads. Beads just like a crazy cat lady sews onto her almost offensively loud cat sweaters. And these beads came from space. Now, thanks to a century-long scientific tug-of-war, experts have dated these beads back 5,000 years. That is 2,000 years before King Tut's meteorite dagger. And you know what that makes these? The oldest known metal objects ever crafted by human hands. And they weren't forged from ore dug from the earth. They were hammered out of meteorites that fell from the sky. What a weird historical twist no one saw coming. Tomb Raiders of the Gerza. Our story begins in 1911, when archaeologists excavated a cemetery in Gerza, about 30 miles south of modern Cairo. They unearthed 9 small, unassuming beads from a tomb dated to around 3200 BC, predating the pyramids by centuries. These beads were carefully strung on necklaces alongside gold and carnelian, 2 of the most prized materials in early Egyptian society. This suggests that whoever was buried with them wasn't some random villager, but someone with status, taste, and apparently access to celestial fashion. Early analysis showed the beads had traces of nickel, which, as you learned already, is a direct indicator of meteorite iron. It was such a shock that at least one scientist must have gasped. I'm sure of it. There was much excitement, followed by rampant speculation, followed by an awkward century without advanced technology to learn any additional facts. So the beads just sort of hung out and waited. They waited until the 1980s. Finally, scientists revisited the beads using more modern tools like electron microprobes. Unfortunately, the readings were underwhelming. Nickel levels were low. The outer crust was heavily corroded. It was like trying to judge a 5-star meal based on the leftover crumbs. Again, the meteorite theory was shelved. Not disproven, just quietly placed on archaeological probation. Some researchers insisted the iron looked too precise, too crafted, too perfect to be made from a space rock. This case may have faded into nothing if not for Thilo Rerin, a professor from University College London who was tired of the ambiguity. His team used non-invasive neutron and X-ray techniques to peer deep into the beads. This allowed them to look beyond the rusted crust at the untouched core. It was the eye, and bingo! The test revealed nickel, cobalt, and germanium. That last one is key. Germanium isn't something you usually find in man-made iron, but it is common in meteorites. These were the 3 materials needed to confirm that yes, absolutely 1000% these beads were made from the stars themselves. No more question marks, no more cautious hedging. The iron in the Gerza beads did not come from Earth. And that's that. Blacksmiths of the stars. The real shock is how much older the beads are than King Tut's dagger. Remember how earlier I told you that the dagger was probably a gift to Tut's granddad? A gift from the Mitanni for marrying one of their princesses. And that means the dagger wasn't Egyptian. So they didn't build the dagger, fine. But they did craft these beads 2 full millennia earlier. How that makes sense, I don't even know. Especially considering that meteoritic iron isn't user-friendly. The material is as hard as stainless steel and about as brittle as your patience after 10 minutes of babysitting your siblings' kids. Working it requires precision heating, hammering, cooling, and maybe a few prayers to Ra. These ancient craftspeople rolled wafer-thin sheets of meteorite, curled them into tubes, and hammered them into bead shapes, all without cracking the metal. This was a lot harder than wrapping Christmas presents. It was highly advanced metallurgy in a time when most people didn't even know what a city was yet. So, while I hope you loved the tale of Tutankhamun's space dagger and the story of the Buddha statue, these humble beads were the first. They appear to have kicked off humanity's love affair with turning space rocks into something beautiful. Don't go anywhere because next up is a side of ancient Egypt you didn't know existed, so go ahead and subscribe before you forget. The myth of the meteorite. In ancient Egypt, the sky wasn't just a backdrop for the gods. It was a god, a living, sacred entity, a source of water, stars, life, death, and you guessed it, metal. 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians looked up at the sky and saw iron. There was a lot of divine mystery up there, but the Egyptians knew there was iron too. Before they had furnaces hot enough to smelt ore, before the Iron Age had even begun, they already knew that iron sometimes falls from the heavens. But how? How could they have possibly known about meteorites without telescopes or even empty paper towel tubes? Because the metal in the stars sometimes fell to Earth, and the Egyptians saw it with their own two eyes. The line in stone. Chiseled onto the walls of a pyramid from 4,400 years ago is the following inscription: "The king seizes the sky and splits its iron." Pretty poetic, huh? It's one of the oldest written hints that the Egyptians understood something that scientists wouldn't formally confirm until the 1800s. And that something is that meteorites are made of iron, and they come from space. This inscription is proof that the Egyptians knew about celestial objects other than moons and planets. And no, it wasn't a mistranslation. The line is from the pyramid texts, Egypt's oldest sacred inscriptions. You can find the pyramid texts carved inside the tombs of kings all across the Nile nation. And in these texts, there are hints that the Egyptians believed iron to be everywhere, in the sky, in the stars, in the bones of the gods themselves. Iron was so important to the Egyptians that it played a central role in the journey of their souls through the afterlife. The thing about ancient Egypt is that they believed the sky enveloped them. The Egyptians thought that the sky was sort of like a bowl, and that their world was inside that bowl. To them, the sky was all around, everywhere, hugging them in its dark embrace. They also thought the sky was made of actual physical iron. So when something fell out of the sky, obviously it too was made of iron. The womb of the stars. If you consider yourself something of an expert on ancient Egypt, you'll probably know that one of their most important deities was the sky goddess Nut. She stretched across the cosmos, her body arched like a bridge from horizon to horizon. At the end of the day, Egyptians believed she swallowed the sun, only to give birth to it at the end of the night, ushering in the dawn with a newly born star. And while this is all very poetic, the Egyptians also thought Nut was made of metal. The Egyptians used the same hieroglyph for the word iron as they did for a bowl of water, which for them was the symbol of the sky. In the pyramid texts, Nut's belly was described as a sky basin of divine liquid metal, and when a pharaoh died, he was said to be reborn through Nut's iron womb. They even used the same sign for iron, wells, and uteruses. All things womb and metal were connected. And remember, this was before the Egyptians even had ovens hot enough to smelt iron. How did they know there was metal in the sky? The fall from the heavens. It's a surprisingly easy answer. Just imagine you're an Egyptian priest 5,000 years ago. The desert is endless. The stars wheel overhead in a spectacular light show. Then one night, the sky splits open and a fireball screams across the heavens. You watch it descend towards the ground, explode in a flash, and then you rush to find the exact spot where it crashed. You know, like trying to find a leprechaun's gold at the end of a rainbow. This is probably what happened, though who's to say if it was a priest or a farmer who found the first fresh meteorite. Whoever it was, they had a heavy, unnaturally smooth stone that rang when struck like a chime. It was cold, but clearly of some importance. Someone understood instinctively that the black globular rock had fallen out of Nut's heavenly womb. It would have only taken one discovery for the information to spread. Once the Egyptians knew that there were space rocks lying around, they started harvesting them and used them to make beads, amulets, and ritual blades. But they didn't make any useful items. Everything the Egyptians crafted from meteoric iron were funerary objects, placed with the dead to aid their voyage into the next world. Because the way they saw it, if iron came from the stars, it belonged to the gods, and the gods could help you reach eternity. It only made sense to fill your grave with as much star power as possible. The first to know. So the Egyptians thought the sky was iron and meteorites were like kidney stones dropped by the Sky Mother. Close, but not quite. Either way, modern science would take another 4,000 years to catch up. In 18th century Europe, the idea that stones could fall from the sky was dismissed as superstition. I'm serious. Enlightenment scholars scoffed at the notion, saying no way could rocks fall from the heavens. Some said meteorites were just volcanic rocks spat out of volcanoes. Others blamed lightning. These were scientists with labs and telescopes, but none of them could accept something so simple that the Egyptians already knew so much earlier than them. Maybe it's because in Egypt, knowledge was performed rather than cataloged. Wisdom was chanted and left etched into the tombs of kings. It was buried in metaphors, passed down through hieroglyphs that were half alphabet, half cosmic code. A single sign might mean sky, iron, goddess, and birth all at once. The Egyptians saw the sky as an iron mother goddess who rained down gifts of metal upon them. Meanwhile, European scholars were like, Earth is flat, Egypt is dumb, rocks don't fall from the sky. What any of this means for the human race, I couldn't even begin to speculate. Are we getting smarter or dumber? Are we getting smarter in the ways of science, while our ability to think outside the box, see the giant goddess in the sky, and accept things that might seem magical simply fading? What are your thoughts on all of this? What do you think about ancient Egyptians worshipping a sky of iron? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!